War Room 2020, Saturday, February 29th, the year of our Lord 2020. I'm Raheem Kassam with Jason Miller and Trump Campaign Advisory Board member Harlan Hill, live on Capitol Hill here in Washington, D.C. Joining us on the line for episode 18 is Stephen K. Bannon, the John Fredericks Radio Network, Salem Broadcast Network, America's Voice.news, and beyond, all across the podcast networks all around the world. We've got a lot to dive into. We've got 247 days and a wake-up, Steve, until the election. It's South Carolina primary day today, and of course all the news coming out about the coronavirus, the rally last night in South Carolina. Steve, are you with us?
I'm right here, guys.
So, Steve, just recap for us. I mean, it has been one of the worst weeks for the stock market since I think 2008. Recap for us, what we're going to hear on pandemic in the next hour as well, and how that plays into the election campaign.
Well, you already see that the president is, I think, taking on his critics. And I think he's done it in a smart way. The Democrats. The first thing they did was attack President Trump for the bold move he made about stopping travel from China, and that bought us time. The reason we've been able to manage this crisis so far on the health side is because we bought time with Trump's moves back during the impeachment. And remember, as soon as he made that move, Joe Biden came out that day. You guys remember, we talked about it. He said he was a racist, he said he was a xenophobe, a nativist, all of that. And it turns out that action was terrific, it was smart, it was even-handed, and it was basically helping the Chinese people, because we've got to get our arms around this thing. They've been, relentless. Nancy Pelosi said the other day, Donald Trump doesn't know what he's talking about. Trump was very magnanimous, I thought, at the press conference the other day, saying, hey, we got to pull together. President Trump's essentially sending a very powerful and strong message, which is the only thing we have to fear here is fear itself, like Roosevelt said in the Great Depression when he took over in, I think, 1932 and started the bank holiday. And so, we have we have a pandemic on this virus, this health crisis throughout the world that's going to have economic consequences, but even more deeply, we have a contagion coming out of China, which is really the meltdown of the Chinese manufacturing base, the logistics chain and the supply chain that comes from that. It's been the globalist Party of Davos project for 25 or 30 years. That is grinding to a halt, and that's going to have massive, massive implications for the world economy, and that is what I think the more powerful response you're seeing in the capital markets throughout the world with all this uncertainty. And it's really been one of the most significant and dramatic sell-offs in the history of financial markets. So, and I think the next couple of weeks are going to be just as choppy. So that's what the president, as Jason said on the very first pandemic, President Trump's a wartime president now. This is a war against a virulent virus, and it's also going to be a understanding of how, remember in World War II we won, besides the bravery and courage of American servicemen, we won because we became the arsenal of democracy and ramped up, production that allowed us to take on both the Germans, the Italians, and the Japanese simultaneously. And I think you're going to see some big moves on the supply chain and some big economic moves over the next several months. And it's only going to make this campaign more intense, because I think everything now is going to revolve around the pandemic and the response to the pandemic.
Stephen, to that point, I want to get right into last night and the controversy from President Trump's comments, where the media is running with this narrative that somehow President Trump was calling the coronavirus a hoax, even though yesterday, literally on the way to the rally, he's saying he's threatening more travel restrictions with Italy and South Korea. And again, Steve, the way that you pointed out, President Trump's bold action initially, I mean, think how bad of a place we would be in right now if President Trump hadn't stopped those flights from China and from quarantining Americans. I mean, we could be in a really bad place. This global pandemic could be here. But last night, I want to set the stage for anyone who missed this, although you can't really miss it because the headlines are all over the TV and the newspaper. But President Trump started off, and Raheem, tell me if you have the clip here, but he said the Democrats are politicizing the coronavirus. This is their new hoax. He's not talking about the coronavirus. He's talking about their political attack. Raheem, you want to play this clip?
Yeah.
Oh, the Democrats are politicizing the coronavirus. You know that, right? Coronavirus. They're politicizing it. We did one of the great jobs, you say, how's President Trump doing? They go, oh, not good, not good. They have no clue. They don't have any clue. They can't even count their votes in Iowa. They can't even count. No, they can't. They can't count their votes. One of my people came up to me and said, Mr. President, they tried to beat you on Russia, Russia, Russia. That didn't work out too well. They couldn't do it. They tried the impeachment hoax. That was on a perfect conversation. They tried anything. They tried it over and over. They've been doing it since you got in. It's all turning. They lost. It's all turning. Think of it. Think of it. And this is their new hoax. But, you know, we did something that's been pretty amazing. We're 15 people in this massive country. And because of the fact that we went early, we could have had a lot more than that. We're doing great. Our country is doing so great. We are so unified.
So, Steve, that goes right to the exact point that he's laying out the case of why his early action had stopped this. But the media's run with this as a hoax. What are your thoughts here?
Well, it's exactly, you know, we've talked about this. He quarantined. Listen, first off, he quarantined, the first president to quarantine anybody in 50 years. Did bold action on the Chinese before anybody else in the world did this, with particularly coming out of central China. He did it. Australia followed, and other nations followed. He's been a leader. This shows you America as the indispensable nation. He's taken dramatic action. He contacted Xi immediately and said, hey, anything you need from the CDC, anything you need from us, anything we can help, we're here, right? If you just look at the actions, right, because this is the signal from the noise. Look at the signal. Bang, very powerful. Pull a task force together. Put it in the right place. Had Azar, had all of it. And yet you hear the sniping, and this is what I get about the mainstream media. Where were they in January? Why does it take, you know, 3 guys or a 5-man team at the Breitbart Embassy to have to bifurcate? You remember the impeachment and the 2020 team to start focusing on pandemic. Why did we do it? Mainstream media wasn't doing it. Where's all the resources of CNN and MSNBC, 6, 7, 8 weeks ago?
This is
they weren't there, right? You know why? Because they couldn't figure out how to politicize it into a weapon. And this shows you their laziness and their stupidity. This is why they're in the middle of a campaign and they can't even figure out, their sponsorship of this kind of neoliberal, neocon order, right, which they see threatened by Bernie Sanders. They have not, because they were too lazy to do the due diligence on Bernie Sanders and on others. So my contempt for them is pretty stunning. And it's this thing with President Trump. President Trump says we've got to pull together on this. This is going to be quite complicated on the health side. It's going to be quite complicated on the economic side, and we need to pull together. And I think President Trump's showing great leadership.
This is the way it always works. You had the AP fact check 3 days ago. Democrats distort coronavirus readiness. Right? Remember, we've had the stories in the New York Times that came about Ukraine. They put the stories out there first. We know what's going on. We can see it with our own eyes, hear it with our own ears. But the second President Trump says anything, the headline flips, right? And it's he's weaponizing it. It's him, conservatives pounce is the narrative, right? We have this story from the Associated Press from February the 26th, where they go through the statements made by Democrat candidates and say, actually, they're not being honest with you about the readiness of the Trump administration on this virus. Steve, aren't people just inured to this messaging now?
Well, and they are, but I don't. Yes, but I don't think that the administration should take the bait. I think they should just stick to the plan. It's action, action, action. I'll be honest with you. I did not like Mick Mulvaney's. I didn't think that was particularly helpful. I thought it was a little too glib. You can't get any more serious than what we have, particularly the complexity of these public health issues around pandemics, epidemics, and viruses. And because so much of it takes place at the deck plate level, as you're seeing in California today, as you're seeing with getting people, properly taken care of, and also tracing this. And there is some issues with the CDC's test kit. The reason is it's quite complicated to do these tests. These tests are as much art as they are science. One of the reasons CDC wanted everything brought back to Atlanta, not put into the field. We're going to hit some speed bumps. It's just in the nature of these things. They're complicated. That's why you got to pull together and stop the sniping. This can't be partisan. And it's the Democrats that started partisan. However, I don't think the administration should do that. I think they should just stick with, hey, here are the actions, more information to the public, push more information out there, action, action, action. And I think President Trump's done a great job of designating Pence, whole of government. He's the number 2 guy in my government. He's in charge of this day to day. Azar is over top of the task force. He's the head of HHS. It all flows through. I happen to think you should have an economic task force. Should be set up immediately with Kudlow, Mnuchin, Peter Navarro to talk about supply chain issues. Remember, the stuff we've talked about 5 and 6 weeks ago, the people we had on the show 6 weeks ago are what they're talking about today. We have gotten to the core of what these problems are, whether it's drugs, the APIs, whether it's the mask and the consumables, whether it's the supply chain overall with industrial. The stuff, and that's all got to be thought through in policy, and people got to get on with it. But I think the administration should just do action, 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 and everything should not take debate from Democrats. Rise above that, as President Trump tried to do at the press conference the other day.
Okay, Steve, we were talking about South Carolina today as well. Any thoughts on that? I'm looking at the latest real clear numbers, and you see the hockey stick. You know, the Biden dip, and then suddenly way up again. Like you remember the old Michael Mann climate change hockey stick? Looks exactly like that. He's got the hockey stick now, Steve.
Yeah, I think. Look, I'd love to see what you guys say about it. Look, Joe Biden, to me, has been. You know, I've actually gone online and now watched some of his responses. You know, he's still all over the map. It's not nobody on that stage, nobody out there right now is going to beat Donald Trump. Only Donald Trump can beat Donald Trump. It's not, none of this, and I think Biden. I actually think, to me, he comes across as a much weaker candidate when you really look at it, and it shows you, I think, how weak this field is and how split Democrats are. That he happens to be surging right now, as Bernie's surging in California and Texas and other places. I think the biggest thing to me that's most stunning is, you know, how South Carolina is not really being a bridge to Super Tuesday like I thought it might be. Bloomberg is clearly not getting the traction he thought. Bernie's starting to surge, and I don't know if Biden will have legs, money, or even meaning or purpose after tonight.
We wanted to bring in. We have Harlan Hill in the studio with us. He's from South Carolina and on the Trump 2020 advisory campaign. Harlan,
that Clyburn bump came down to, or that Biden bump was the Clyburn bump. That demonstrates the breadth of the political machine that Clyburn still operates there, and I think should give pause to a lot of Republicans about his ability to mobilize voters across the state, both in South Carolina, when we're trying to take that back, but also in Jamie Harrison's race for the U.S. Senate. They're mobilizing a lot of black voters, a lot of young voters, and Biden got that endorsement for Clyburn exactly 12 hours after the Democratic debate in Charleston, and it resulted in an almost immediate 12-point bump in the polls. So that political machine is real, but how can Biden replicate that in other states? It doesn't look like he's in any position to when Sanders is running the table in California and Texas and other states.
Is it Jamie Harrison or Tim Scott?
Well, that's what I was going to say. And Harlan and Raheem and Steve, I'm not sure if you guys saw this, but Chris Matthews, who, I mean, look, we pick on Joe Biden quite a bit on this program, but Chris Matthews is barely a step removed from his head being full of mashed potatoes, just like Joe Biden. So literally he's talking to Jamie Harrison, who's running against Lindsey Graham this year. And anyone in South Carolina knows who Jamie Harrison is. He's run numerous different campaigns. Looks nothing like Tim Scott. They both happen to be African American. And so Chris Matthews is literally talking to Jamie Harrison, and they're showing the video clip from the Trump rally of Tim Scott there with Lindsey Graham and Trump. And Chris Matthews says to him, this is so great. I see you standing there next to the guy you're going to beat, maybe. And it was such a cringeworthy. I mean, even the folks on the left are jumping in and be like, Chris Matthews, what is going on?
I mean, he definitely could be like a very younger, sort of airbrushed, but he doesn't look like him just to look at the two of them. Is that? Are we being too hard on Chris Matthews? Is that he's looking at a monitor like way in the distance or something?
No, this is just Chris Matthews. I mean, he's just completely lost it. And I mean, it's the two gentlemen look nothing alike.
So this is now Biden's to lose. It doesn't look like he is going to lose it. What does that say, Steve? Feel free to jump in here. What does it say about Bernie's momentum? He had the big mo. Does this stop him in his tracks? Does it allow Biden to raise more money? Does it make people reassess who they're backing?
Well, I mean, I think Jason and Harlan probably have a better feel of that. They're the pros in the room. But hey, look, I just don't see. And I think particularly smart money is watching Joe Biden very closely. And I agree with Harlan about the bump he got from the support from the congressional delegation down there. But I think I think people are looking at this and they're weighing and measuring and not seeing him taking on Donald Trump. I actually think his time in South Carolina has not really been a surge. I think it's exposed his weaknesses, and particularly if you get a chance and go on YouTube and follow his speeches and look at the groups he goes in front of. He just rambles and rambles and rambles. And it's not just the small mistakes of saying, for the Senate instead of a judge. Those are kind of nits. Nothing kind of hangs together. There's no real thought. He doesn't really present any kind of vision, or really, you don't feel he has any understanding of the world economy or, a national security today. It's very disjointed. I actually think he comes out of here. I'd be stunned. The media, they're so lazy. They get into the horse race, which is easy to follow. But I just don't see Biden. And quite frankly, I think he'd be by far the weakest candidate to go up against Trump.
Completely agreed. And, one of the things that's going on in the media this morning, everyone has the exact same story up. Could a big win by Joe Biden catapult him back into the race? I mean, the reality is there's not enough of a time gap, or there's not enough of a bump that'll come out of South Carolina just before Tuesday and Super Tuesday, where we're going to have a whole ton of delegates that are picked. And also as far back as Biden is, particularly in places like California and in Texas. Although he's in the mix, but he's a ways back. But the media wants this to be a Bernie Biden race because they don't see it as stealing it from Bernie if they can give it to Joe Biden. Now, it might be stealing it from him if they're giving it to Michael Bloomberg or to Elizabeth Warren or someone else. But you can tell the media saying, hey, we see Joe Biden has serious problems. He's a terrible candidate, but we view him as a stand-up guy. He's someone who can take on Trump. The media knows that Donald Trump will wipe the floor with Bernie Sanders.
Well, and one of the things we've been waiting on was some consolidation on both sides of the Democratic Party between the two factions. And we've actually started to see it happen where Warren in the South Carolina polls has fallen, and Sanders has been the beneficiary of that. And then you look at California, Sanders is up 18 there. Sanders is up 8 in Texas. He's up 9 in Michigan. He's up 5 to 6 points in Virginia. I mean, it seems like all of his new support is coming at Warren's.
Isn't Sanders up in Massachusetts now? Isn't she running? Isn't Warren running second to Sanders by a couple points in Massachusetts?
It's embarrassing. Yes.
I mean, that's a death blow to her. I think this weekend and Super Tuesday is, but she is. I think she's starting to fade, and that's another person. I think more people see these people, the less enthusiastic they get.
She knew she was going down, and she took Michael Bloomberg on the way with her, it seems. President Trump making remarks about Michael Bloomberg last night, about him, saying he wants out. From what he hears, he wants out. Could that be actual? Is that what's going around the New York billionaire circuit?
That's one of the things. Bloomberg is definitely on life support at this point, and it's amazing to watch their campaign. It's like a $500 million in. And at this point, they're probably at more like $600 million. And you realize they never really had a plan to establish Bloomberg as a candidate. They never had a plan to get him out there to talk with people. This was basically they always say in politics or even in war, Steve, that any strategy based on hope or based on some other event happening isn't really a strategy. And that's what we're finding with the Bloomberg folks. But I do want to throw one other thought out there to the group. I made this point yesterday, this whole political hoax that the media and some of the Democrats are pushing, that somehow coronavirus will be the end of Trump politically, I think is very, very misguided. In fact, I think it's President Trump's early, strong, decisive leadership against coronavirus that could be the issue that catapults him to a re-election win, particularly as we talk about this question of who's best prepared to keep you safe. If we have a Bernie versus a Trump, I think Trump is going to be the one that comes across in that. Steve, what are your thoughts?
Well, look at that. You want to compare Bernie as commander-in-chief or somebody that you're depending upon to keep your kids safe at night from this, or Joe Biden? This is my point. I think the more that these guys are exposed, the more they get up there, you see there's nobody on that stage. Hey, that's why I'm a big supporter of Crooked in the bullpen, right? Or Michelle Obama at the convention. I don't think we've heard the last of the Democrats, but certainly nobody on that stage. What's most stunning to me, and guys, I got to jump here at the bottom of the hour, but just to throw out there, what is most stunning to me with his money in a TV state is the fade that you're seeing on Michael Bloomberg in California. California, I thought he felt with his money and being really a TV market for politics, that by putting in $90 to $100 million focused on California, that who'd be able to drive it. It's pretty stunning to me to see the fade.
We asked the audience yesterday what Hillary Clinton's podcast should be called. Jason, my favorites were War Broom 2020. I really like that one.
Do we get royalties if that happens?
And a supremely underrated one, by the way, with its Epstein connotations. It's Hanging with Hillary.
So good. I love our audience.
Remember,
so good.
Hillary didn't kill herself.
Steve, thanks for hanging with us this morning. You'll be back for the War Room Pandemic Show at the top of the next hour. Make sure you stick around, ladies and gentlemen out there. The hashtag is #WarRoom2020 this Saturday, February 29th, 2020. Jason, when we come back, we'll keep talking about this, a little bit more about South Carolina. We'll also get into one of the things that's probably going to be buried today in the news cycle, which is this historic peace negotiation that's ongoing with the Taliban and what's going on there. We have Harlan Hill from the Trump Campaign Advisory Board, Trump 2020 Advisory Board, here in the house with us, a South Carolina native, and we'll be bringing you all the latest from the coronavirus and the news as it breaks over the course of the next hour plus, with War Room Pandemic up next.
War Room 2020. Bannon, Miller, Kassan.
Episode 18, War Room 2020, February the 29th, 2020. Bannon, Miller, Kassan, and now Hill, Harlan Hill, Trump 2020 Advisory Board member. Thanks for joining us in the studio this morning. We wanted to get you on because you are a South Carolina native. Is that not correct?
It is.
And we talked a little bit about it in the last segment. I want to get onto a few more of the gaffes now that Biden's been treating us to along the way. Remember, but then de-arrested or unarrested in was it South Africa when he was going to see Nelson Mandela on Robben Island. How many ever decades ago. He told the story multiple times, and we covered this on the show when he did it, and we had the debate. Was he just making a gaffe? Is he a doddery old man, or was there a nefarious element to the lie that was clearly within that gaffe? What do we think of it now? He's apologized, but I didn't really understand. He didn't really give a reason for why those words came out of his mouth.
No, he tried to say basically that his his movements were inhibited, or he was separated from the Congressional Black Caucus members that were going. Remember, Andrew Young said that he had no idea about any of this arrest or what he was talking about.
That was the ambassador at the time.
Correct. But you see the multitude of errors that Joe Biden has had just over the last 24 hours, in addition to reversing himself on yesterday on the Today Show about his arrest, non-arrest. I mean, the glad to be here in North South Carolina. He said he was a professor. Like at some point now, he was a professor, and then also he looked forward to appointing the first African-American female senator. I mean, it's just at this point. I mean, he's just there's sleepy, creepy Uncle Joe. There's not much energy, and I think he's just slipping.
Well, and he has a history of lying and deceitful behavior. I mean, in 1987 or 1988, when he was running for president, he straight up plagiarized a speech, and it created a massive controversy that ultimately led to him dropping out of the race. And so this isn't anything new, and you can't chalk this up to him just being forgetful or a senior moment, when you've been doing this for decades. He's a dishonest person fundamentally.
I have one for you.
Well, I'm looking forward to appointing the first African American woman to the United States Senate.
Where do we start with that?
I don't know. I'm guessing Kamala Harris and Carol Moseley Braun might take issue with that. Maybe.
I'm guessing the Constitution might take issue with the President of the United States appointing people to the Senate as well.
I'm not sure that's a gaffe. I mean, I think that he's probably playing up to a black audience, and he just off the cuff came up with something that he thought would appeal to the crowd. And maybe,
well, he did say at the debate he looks forward to appointing, or that he promises that his first Supreme Court pick will be an African American woman.
Right.
Yeah.
I imagine that's probably what he was thinking.
Yeah,
but to Harlan's point, I mean, look, Joe Biden was a terrible candidate in '88. terrible candidate in 2008, and he's clearly proving to be a terrible candidate in 2020.
He loves to lose, but he does have this. He does revert to the Senate quite a lot. Remember, he's running for the U.S. Senate.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I forgot about that one.
In his own words. Basically, there's a thing in his head where if there's a blank, he fills it with the word Senate. That's what we know about Joe Biden. I want to pivot as long as we're all done on ragging on Joe Biden today. And to be fair,
never really get done beating up on Joe Biden.
Well, to be fair, that's what Corn Pop said. But to be fair, he will win today.
Yes.
And there will be some momentum gained by it. You might be right, Jason, about it may not be enough in time for Super Tuesday, but Sunday shows, Sunday papers, leading into Monday, there'll be something, right? There's got to be some spark he takes off the back of this.
Yeah, and look, Biden's flooding the zone with the Sunday shows tomorrow. He's going to be out there trying to, and you see that the way the media is opening up space for him, he's essentially doing the full Ginsburg. He's doing almost every show that's out there. Of course, he's not going to be joining Mornings with Maria or say Howie Kurtz, but he's going to be doing almost all of the Sunday shows. The media wants him to be the alternative to Bernie Sanders. They are literally clearing the decks and saying, please, Joe Biden, please save us from Bernie Sanders and then from Donald Trump.
And he can't make a credible argument that he is. I mean, I believe that Buttigieg is still very weak. He hasn't been able to really capitalize on the momentum he had coming out of Iowa, which I think was by design on the Democratic Party establishment. But Biden will probably win at least one other major state in the coming days, and it's Florida. He's up 9 points there. There's not a whole lot of polling out of Florida. But I wouldn't imagine that his position would be diminished coming out of South Carolina with a big 15-point win.
And he could pull off a win in North Carolina.
Yes,
that one's
definitely.
still pretty close. I mean, Sanders will have the big win in California. Expect him to have the win in Texas. So delegate-wise, Sanders is still going to be in the driver's seat. But I do think that Joe Biden will have be number 2 with regard to delegates then coming out of Tuesday.
And every Democrat that I talk to makes the argument that if Sanders does not have the requisite delegates coming out of the first vote on the floor, and it goes to a second ballot, that they will screw him, they will cheat him out of it, as long as someone like Biden or Buttigieg is within striking distance.
So walk us through that. So let's say going to convention. I mean, Elizabeth Warren has already said she's going to be in this thing until convention. Yeah. Whether or not it has any political viability or not, that's another issue. Walk us through a convention, how that happens. Say you have a Bernie, say you have a Bloomberg, a Biden, a Warren. I mean, heck, throw in Amy and Mayor Pete as well. Say they're all technically candidates going to convention. How does that play out, Harlan?
Well, you'll have the delegates that they've been awarded through the primary and caucus process cast their votes essentially on the floor at the convention. If no one prevails with a clear majority, then it goes to a second ballot. And at that point, under the new rules in the DNC, the superdelegates are able to cast a ballot. And these are all establishment picks, people that would be very loyal to Biden, and they will have
And that's like 15% of the second round.
Tremendous.
Of vote.
It'll probably result in someone like Biden, or maybe someone that isn't even running. Hillary Clinton or Bloomberg.
Who?
Crooked.
Oh, Crooked. I had no idea who you were talking about there. Or Bloomberg.
Well, who knows? What's interesting to me is he spent almost twice as much as Donald Trump did to win the presidency to effectively be embarrassed in the Democratic primary process so far. President Trump spent a little over $300 million in 2016. And Bloomberg, like you said earlier, is probably got to be close to $600 million at this point.
So, but walk us through this. So, say you have the first ballot, and I would assume that Sanders, because he's going to be relatively close. I mean, I think the latest Nate Silver 538 projection has him somewhere in the 1,700 or 1,750 delegates out of the 1,990 that you need. He probably finishes first. Then you have these super delegates in. Do they then start dropping off, say, the lowest person who still has delegates, or is it they just keep voting, but until someone actually removes their name? How does that work as far as the winnow the field?
I think that you'll probably have people whipping to award different positions in any eventual administration to consolidate the field. So I think that they probably have a game plan going into the second ballot about who's going to step aside, who's going to be the running mate, who's going to be the Secretary of State. I think that those favors are going to be awarded. I think the Democratic Party establishment is so committed to defending Bernie Sanders because he presents this very clear threat to their grip on power here in Washington that they will have a plan on the second ballot. I don't think this goes to a third ballot.
And then Milwaukee burns down.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
We got to get into that in another show. Actually, what the preparedness for that convention is going to be as far as a law enforcement situation is concerned, because those Bernie guys have been very clear that if they feel like they're getting screwed, they're going to burn the place down. We're going to have the National Guard on the streets.
I think you're going to see e-scooters being used as projectiles. I mean, it will not be safe in Milwaukee. I mean, those things will just be flying out of nowhere.
But there will be a total media blackout on that. I mean, in 2016, I was at the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia, and they put basically thousands of Bernie Sanders supporters in like a cage, and
Kettling.
yeah, and they started flipping over barriers, setting fires, and really the only place I ever saw coverage of that was InfoWars. I mean, I didn't see it on any of the other major networks, including Fox. And so it did happen there. There was just a total media blackout on it. And so does the media move to, to cover that up again? Or, do they want to continue to portray Sanders people to be, outraged and violent?
That was Philadelphia?
That was Philadelphia in 2016.
Sounds like Paris yesterday,
Yeah.
or the Greek border today, just to make it contemporaneous and international, because that's what I do here, guys. Speaking of contemporaneous and international, Jason, something that probably won't get as much coverage as it deserves over this weekend is the Secretary Pompeo going to Afghanistan, signing the ceasefire with the Taliban. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so this is getting almost no media attention, but it's a huge deal. Secretary Pompeo sitting down to sign the essentially a peace accord, ceasefire with the Taliban, and this will, just really boiling down to the simple nuts and bolts. Taliban quit shooting at us. We start a troop drawdown. This is making good on one of President Trump's key promises to start bringing our troops home. And this is absolutely huge. And I can't stress enough how big this is. This is literally, for people to remind people, this is our longest running war in our nation's history. We're on year number 19. Think about that. This has been a declared war for 19 years.
For what? What have we gotten out of that engagement?
Exactly. And this goes to the very heart of America first, of nationalism, of populism, of saying we need to make sure that we're taking care of our own country and our own interests first. Because Harlan, it's such a simple question, but that's really at the crux of this. And think, you basically had that entire second term of Bush. You had 2 terms of President Obama. Now we're doing the 3rd year of President Trump's presidency. This is huge. This is momentous. And I think this is something that, as you talk about accomplishments and wins, this is a pretty dang big one.
So the comments coming out from the Pentagon Press Secretary Alyssa Farah right now is a historic day here in Kabul. SecDef Esper put it well. Along with our NATO allies and partners, we have been committed to ensuring that Afghanistan never becomes a safe haven for terrorists to threaten our homelands. America and its allies have made tremendous sacrifices in pursuit of these goals, as have the people of Afghanistan. We honor the brave service members who have served, especially those who have been casualties in this war. We remember the innocent civilians lost in this struggle, the ongoing efforts to achieve a political settlement after many long years of fighting reflect a shared desire for a sovereign, unified Afghanistan at peace with itself and its neighbors, end quote.
Yeah, no, and thank you for reading that. This is a momentous thing both for the country, for global ramifications. I don't think President Trump is getting anywhere near the credit that he should on this. And so I think this is a great day. And so often we get pulled into these day-by-day so-called hoaxes, or here's the media shiny object of the day. This is something that will impact the rest of the world.
Yeah, absolutely, and really should be getting more coverage. But look, it's a crazy news cycle right now. You have obviously the coronavirus and the market implications, and the health implications, and the political implications now of that. But you also have Super Tuesday coming up, and the president is about to rally in Charlotte, in North Carolina. Now, on the show the other day, Stephen K. Bannon said, hey, maybe it's time to sort of pivot, not maybe do the rallies, but maybe go to the CDC instead, get the market some strength back, give them some confidence back. What do you think? What do you think we're going to hear in Charlotte?
Well, I think really the Tuesday is kind of the last stand, so to speak, for the big, broad Democratic field. We're going to know that Bernie Sanders is in the driver's seat, and then the issue becomes, does Joe Biden definitely emerge as a candidate to steal it from him at convention? That's really what it's left to. There's not going to be the issue of Mike Bloomberg catch someone for first place. So a lot of the, I guess you'd say the Democratic clown car, to be polite, a lot of that narrative will go away. And so I think it's smart that President Trump is doing the rally on Monday night in Charlotte, which is North Carolina being a Super Tuesday state. Keep bigfooting the Democrats in their primary process. I do think after that, then I think now is the time to start making that pivot to, again, here's the key with the presidency and when you're running for re-election. Do the things that your opponents can't. So when President Trump does these international trips, when President Trump signs these trade deals, when President Trump goes to the CDC, when he takes these big momentous steps, these are the things that the Democratic field can't follow him. I think after Monday, let's make that pivot.
Why doesn't Bloomberg turn on Sanders? Why doesn't Bloomberg start to direct some of those funds to tear him down and to prolong this process so that this does go to a convention fight and then he might be able to finagle his way onto the ticket?
Because his team are operating with the same mentality that they had coming into the whole thing, which is, hey, we're not going to punch left because we're the big dog in this race. They haven't come to grips with the fact that they've been whipped several times on stage. They got absolutely caned by Elizabeth Warren in the first debate. Then you had Mike Bloomberg coming out and maybe trying to make a joke about it in the second debate, saying, I don't know why these other candidates have turned up since I beat them all so badly last week, underscoring the fact that he lost so badly, which is another loss in and of itself. But they're still operating with the fact that, we're not going to punch left. We're bigger than that. We're only going to attack President Trump. You're absolutely right. If he wants to start making up some ground, he's got to start hitting Bernie, correct?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a thing we've all been involved in, multi-candidate primaries of some fashion, where sometimes if you're the B candidate, sometimes, it's smarter to hit C as a way to increase your leverage position as opposed to hitting candidate A, or vice versa, with all these different lanes and the way that voters peel off. This goes to that point I made earlier about the Bloomberg folks never really having a plan for how this would play out. They went out and said, hey, we're going to spend money, we're going to elevate up the ticket. But then as soon as he got punched, and what is it, a full third of Democratic primary voters now view Mike Bloomberg as being sexist. Not a great place to be, particularly in the Democratic primary. Bloomberg has never quite figured out, here's how I shoot to the top other than just write checks. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, it sounds like they have great sushi and they have iPhone 11s, and it's a great place to show up and work, at least for a couple more weeks here.
The Bloomberg campaign?
Yeah.
No, they have a deal. Remember how close he is with China. They have iPhone 15s. They're getting them ahead of time.
But no, actually, China's at they're having massive production problems. So a lot of that's been an issue. So I don't know.
No, I know. They were supposed to have 16s.
No, so they're, look, I think you're right. And there's no rationale for the Bloomberg candidacy other than this checkbook at this point.
So I was trying to find this clip from the campaign rally in South Carolina yesterday, but effectively it's the president saying who he's asking the audience live who they would prefer him to run against, and it looked like they preferred Bernie Sanders to be the Democrat nominee, thinking that Bernie Sanders would be the easiest to beat. That narrative of nationalism and capitalism together being able to beat the socialism and sort of crazy AOC style stuff of Bernie Sanders. And he joked ahead of this. He said, I assume this is okay from a campaign finance standpoint before polling the audience live on television. But is that the right gauge that the supporters have out there? Would Bernie be easier for the president to beat than any other of those candidates?
Of the realistic candidates, I would actually disagree and say I think Joe Biden is the weakest. I don't think there's enough crossover vote or Trump cheerleading that could ever launch Joe Biden to do it. That's going to ultimately be the superdelegates decide they want to go and steal it from. Here's the reason why. Joe Biden, as we've seen, is just a terrible candidate. He's a reminder of the past. That makes it more of a change versus status quo election, even though Trump's the incumbent against Joe Biden. It's a Bernie Sanders. It's much more of an ideological battle. And I think that since we're still a center-right country, I think Bernie Sanders is just too far to the left. But look, it makes it fun. It's it's beaten up on socialism. But I do warn some of our allies and some of our listeners on this. Bernie has a dedicated base. We've seen a number of polls over the last couple of days, more than this could be just an accident. But Bernie has some pockets of support in some states where we should be doing better. But against Bernie, he's shown that actually some of that base is resilient. In much in the same way that populism is at the core of this Trump movement. There's a lot of populism in the Bernie base. Now, there's certain people that are in the AOC progressive wing, but there are some dedicated populists, which, Harlan, you know quite a bit about.
Yeah. I get nervous looking at how Sanders polls against President Trump in states like Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan. I mean, there was a poll I saw recently in Ohio where Sanders was actually leading the president. Nobody else in the field was. Now, maybe that's an outlier. We'll have to see if there's other polling that backs that up. But Sanders at least is a candidate with ideas, and he's presenting something that is incredibly palatable, especially to younger voters. I mean, the prospect of erasing $100,000 in debt and having free access to health care is a lot to motivate people to get to the polls. Now, I also think that we can't diminish something that seems sort of arbitrary, but I think is really important. It's how candidates perceive the person that is going to be their leader and to keep them safe. And Sanders is someone that has had cardiac problems recently. He is quite advanced in his years. He may not be that far apart from President Trump in terms of age, but in terms of health, the president looks incredibly strong, and I wouldn't downplay the significance of that, because ultimately, I think, especially when we're talking about a wartime president as we face coronavirus, they want to see a strong leader.
Harlan, it was 45 days ago, on January the 15th, that you sat in this same seat and you said Bernie Sanders is going to run away with this. Now, at the time, the poll averages showed that he was at about 19% compared with Biden's 28%. Now that's flipped. He's at 29.5% to Biden's 18%. What did you know back then? And why didn't we put some money on it?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. That's a good point. Well, I thought that Sanders would perform well in the first two states and well, actually the first three states, and that's panned out. I thought that Biden was weak. By then, I'll admit that he was already starting to have some of these gaffes, and he looked a little senile. The one that surprised me was actually Elizabeth Warren. I thought that she would have performed better than she has.
I think a lot of people thought that.
Yeah. But I think that her legacy from this race will be what she did to Mike Bloomberg. She kamikazed him when he was first coming out. Yeah, she did.
Yeah, she did.
And when that was his moment to shine. I feel like if he had done well in that first debate, I think that a lot of moderate Democrats and independents would have said, you know what? This might be the guy. I think he might have been able to galvanize some support behind him.
Even if he had, and we talked about all the strategy around it back then, but even if he had turned around to her and in that moment said, we'll talk about that. This is a long campaign and we'll get through all of that. We can of our records of employing people, both of our records of dealing with people, both of our records of lying and not lying, Pocahontas. If he had turned around and done anything like that, he'd probably be the favorite by now.
Yeah.
And that's it. Hey, Jason, speaking of Sanders, fact check for us. Is Garth Brooks supporting Bernie Sanders?
No, so this is kind of, sometimes we throw in like the pop culture fun. So Garth Brooks doing a concert in Detroit, and he wears a Barry Sanders jersey, number 20. I mean, he's someone who, as I was growing up, I remember this was kind of the early years of just showing how much a nerd I was, even back in like middle school and in elementary school. But fantasy football, he was always the guy who'd break off these runs, and then he retires after like 9 seasons. He was only 29 or 30 years old. Just says, you know what? I have more to life than this. Great guy, would always win the NFL's off the field Man of the Year event. So Garth Brooks is in Detroit, where Sanders played his entire career, wearing a Barry Sanders jersey, and Mega Nation just started throttling this guy, thinking he's supporting Bernie
because it
Sanders.
says Sanders 20.
Yes,
right?
It said Sanders 20 on it. And so like you can't, some people are like, why are you supporting Bernie Sanders? And they absolutely clubbed him, and the poor guy, he's out there like, no, it's Barry Sanders, trying to do a hat tip for it. But it's almost as good as the, so we got Chuck D from Public Enemies doing a concert for Bernie Sanders in the Flavor Flav, 911 is a joke. He's out there saying, no, Public Enemy is not doing this. It's only Chuck D. I don't support Bernie Sanders. They have this massive squabble going on.
And
I
there's
love
no
it.
Public Enemy without Flavor Flav, right? Harlan, where can people follow you on Twitter?
At Harlan.
Harlan, at
right.
Harlan on Twitter. Jason Miller, Raheem Kassam, Stephen K. Bannon will be back with War Room Pandemic in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. Follow us at War Room 2020. We'll be back with Pandemic in just a moment.